All right, and good afternoon, everyone. This is usually where I tell you it's high noon here on the East Coast. Well, it's 10 minutes past high noon, but close enough for streaming. It is exactly 28 days, 4 weeks, in other words, until the big day, until Election Day, midterms 2018. Hey, guess what? If you've been watching us every week, you might notice the board looks a little bit different today. We've been sprucing it up. We've been adding some bells and whistles. We got a lot that we're going to be debuting over the next few weeks. Again, building up to that big night 4 weeks from tonight when we find out, can Republicans hang on to the House? Will Democrats pick it up for the first time in 8 years? What about the U.S. Senate? What about those governor's races? And oh yeah, what about what it all means for the big one in 2020? So I'm going to introduce you to some of these, maybe not necessarily right now. There's work in progress. We'd hope to show you a little bit, but we weren't sure. So we'll get to that maybe in a future episode, but you're getting at least a sneak peek here of what our main screen is going to look like. But in terms of what's going to happen over the next 28 days, of course, the big question right now in politics is the fallout from the Brett Kavanaugh nomination fight. Brett Kavanaugh now an associate justice on the Supreme Court. He's had 2 swearings in. He had the sort of unofficial, the official one behind closed doors, then he had the ceremonial one last night. So Kavanaugh is now on the Supreme Court. Republicans are saying that they think, and they didn't expect this going in, they think that the fight over this has energized their voters. Remember, we've been at this board all year telling you there's been this enthusiasm gap between the two parties. Well, it was measured at about a 10-point enthusiasm gap over the summer. There was a poll last week that showed that falling down to 2 points. So that's one factor. Republicans say they finally got the energy. Do they have it? Will it last? What about the Trump factor in all of this? Donald Trump's approval rating right now, again, it sits there. If you average all the polls together, this is an interesting one. Let's see if this tool works at least. Trump's approval rating, well, we got yellow. That's probably really hard to see, but 43.6% is Trump's average approval rating. The interesting thing on this is before the Kavanaugh fight a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about Cohen and Manafort and the McCain funeral, Trump's approval rating was about 3 points lower than this. He bottomed out, I think, in the average at 40.2. So he's actually gone up about 3.5 points. Remember, Republicans have been saying the closer that number is, that Trump approval rating to 45, to the mid-40s, the better they feel about actually hanging on to the House. The more it gets into the low 40s, the more it breaks into the high 30s, the better Democrats feel about that blue wave forming. So that's the big picture 4 weeks out. The question is Kavanaugh. The question is energy. The question is Trump's approval rating. Has that been rebounding? Why might that be rebounding? We're going to talk about it with our panel here. We're going to come back a little bit later, I hope, and show you some deeper dive on Senate races. We got a bunch of Senate polls in the last couple of weeks, but right now I'm going to head over and say hello to my panel. I'm going to introduce you to them as well. Joining me now, once again, I complete the trip over here without tripping and breaking my neck. It was very exciting. Joining me now, Slate's Mike Pesca, Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, and Corinne Jean-Pierre, senior advisor at MoveOn.org. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I want to, 4 weeks out, we're essentially 1 month out from Election Day. Big picture view of where this election is. The conventional wisdom all year has been the Democrats are favored, are likely to win back the House. Maybe the Senate is in play too. Matthew, on the right, let me just start with you. Do you actually feel right now that if the election were held today, Republicans would hold the House?
No. No, I think the House is increasingly out of reach for Republicans. And
even with the Kavanaugh thing?
I think so. And we have to remember with Kavanaugh, there's still 4 weeks to go. And we woke up this morning, everyone was talking about the ceremony, the Kavanaugh ceremony last night. And then what's the big news? It's Nikki Haley. So the idea that Kavanaugh is going to last a month, I think, is kind of spurious. And Republicans shouldn't be too overconfident that this enthusiasm attached to Kavanaugh is going to last. There's more general enthusiasm. I think Republicans are finally tuning in, and that explains, I think, some of the closing gap. Yeah,
and on that point, actually, let's play a little bit of the sound here. We have Mitch McConnell, and this is sort of the message, it sounds like, emerging from the Kavanaugh fight that Republicans think they can kind of harness, that they can run on for the home stretch. The idea that there was a mob out to get Kavanaugh and out to get sort of the Trump on this one. Let's play what McConnell had to say after this nomination fight.
Well, the people that were attacking our members at their homes and in the halls, it was really quite a display of aggressiveness, far beyond what I would consider peaceful protesting. They were trying to intimidate members of the Senate, not only in our home states, but also up here, actually in the Capitol and at our homes here in Washington. And I'm really proud of my members for not knuckling under to those kind of mob-like tactics.
What do you think of that message, Corinne?
Mob-like tactics is really, I mean, he's confusing it with democracy. I mean, it's our right to go and protest. I protested last week. I was there. I spoke at some of the events that were being held, and people were energized and angry. They went from being energized all year to now being angry. And this is what the Republicans have been able to do to our base. So I've been saying a lot that it's not about the Kavanaugh bump. It was about the outcome. So if Kavanaugh had not gotten to the Supreme Court justice, I would say I would really be worried that, yes, it would have totally continued that energy for Republicans. But because we are the ones that lost, the energy is going to continue in our favor, because now women are angry, people are angry, and they're saying to themselves,
well, I mean, now they're angry, but I mean, that's been
why I said it went from energy to being angry. I think it actually went a notch up.
I mean, can you go from 11 to higher?
All I can tell you, Steve, is what I saw last week, and being in this business for a long time, whether working on campaigns or being part of the progressive movement, I'd never seen before. Women, and I'm talking about diverse women, coming out and being incredibly sad and angry and wanting to be involved and try to figure out how we're going to fight and how we're going to change things. And so that's the difference that I saw.
What did you make of the divisions that emerged? Because one thing that struck me looking at the polling on Kavanaugh, it's the least popular Supreme Court pick since Bork in '87, who went down. But another way of looking at it is it's almost like a proxy for Trump. The support opposed for Kavanaugh looks like approve, disapprove for Trump.
Yeah, that's why Trump turned him into a mini Trump. And from what we hear, out of keeping with his personality, shouting at the Senate panel, if the Republicans retain control of the Senate, I don't think it'll be because people came out because they were afraid that Mitch McConnell was going to get yelled at. That is the spurious, specious. I never know if it's spurious or specious, but that is definitely a bad argument. But you're right in terms of the numbers. Yeah, we did see that enthusiasm gap narrow. So Republicans got fired up. At the same time, we saw Kavanaugh getting less popular. We saw women defecting from the Republican Party. So we had these counter trends. And the one thing I would caution all the viewers is, even though the enthusiasm gap narrows between people who self-identify as Republican and people who self-identify as Democrats, the independents didn't say that there wasn't much of a change in independents, and there still are slightly fewer people self-identifying as Republican than have 2 years ago. So I think overall, you know what? If Kavanaugh was put forward and it went as we thought, without the allegations, without the fight about sexual harassment, I think we are right now exactly where I thought we'd be on September 4th or 5th.
What about, Matt, the gender gap issue on this? There was a poll from CNN yesterday that showed Trump's approval rating right now with men is +8. 8 points above water. With women, it's -31. That's a 39-point. I mean, we're used to seeing in elections probably a gap of, 15 to 20 points. We're seeing at least double that with Donald Trump right now. When you look at the Republican Party's fortunes, not just in this election, but long term, do you think there is something almost transformative here in terms of the gender gap that we're looking at right now?
Well, I don't know how transformative it is. I think it's definitely bad for Republicans in 2018. And I think part of that is the voters, the women voters, specifically the white women voters who backed Trump in 2016, they are at danger of becoming dislodged from the Trump coalition. And if that happens, then the House looks very bad for Republicans. So I think a lot of these House candidates now are trying to reestablish a connection with the white women voters who backed Trump by a slim majority in 2016, try to get them back on board in order to kind of salvage the House.
Can you see a way to do that?
I think there's some Republican consultants who think that if you do soft messaging, if you try to take the focus away from Donald Trump and make it more about kind of just the American economy, kind of some of the achievements, even the court achievements. Women are not a monolithic block when it came to Kavanaugh or when it comes to the Supreme Court in general. So if you try to say, hey, it's not all about Trump, there are some good things that this Trump administration, Republican Congress has done, then maybe you have a shot. Here's the problem. It is all about Trump.
It is.
And every poll we see, that's what comes away from it, is that at the end of the day, this is an election about Donald Trump. Yeah. And it's one base versus the other.
It really is, yeah.
Well, I'm curious then, from a Democratic standpoint, because we always hear this idea of, do the Democrats have a message? Is the message for Democrats essentially, whatever Donald Trump says on this given day, we're the opposite of it?
So here's the thing. We actually do have a message, health care. Let's not forget a year ago when Republicans tried to take health care away from 32 million people. Months later, in November, that was the #1 issue in Virginia that got the governor, the Democratic governor there to win. Look what we did in that state legislature. And then in December for Alabama. So health care was a key issue, and I think it continues to be so, as we've seen in pollings for Democrats. So we actually do have issues that really resonate with the base that we should continue to talk about: the economy, the tax cuts, which is very unpopular for Republicans. So it's not that it's not there, but people are paying attention. They see what's going on with Donald Trump. They know and they're aware. And let's not forget, Donald Trump has the biggest bully pulpit. And if he can't stay on message, if Republicans can't keep him on message, then yeah, he's not there. Republicans in suburban areas and those swing congressional districts are going to have a hard time with women.
I'm trying to figure out. I'm of two minds on this, Mike. I guess when I look at suburban areas, when I look in New Jersey, outside Washington, D.C., outside Kansas City, Southern California, a bunch of different areas, I see a wave forming. I see a blue wave forming. The energy for Democrats has been there. You saw it in the Virginia governor's race last year in Northern Virginia. I see it there. But when I look outside of that, I've got a lot of question marks. And there's part of me thinks that what we might see on Election Day is a series of mini waves around the country that add up to something close to or around that 23 that Democrats need, but maybe not much more and maybe even a little bit less.
Yeah, you know, the odds are saying that it's somewhere around a 75% chance of a takeover. It's somewhere, if it's a huge wave where Democrats have a double-digit seat majority, just as possible as eking out a win, just as possible as not even getting there. As far as the gender gap, I do think that there's a difference between polls, which they're just on Donald Trump. So it's not about him running against anyone. I think there's a difference between polls and election. So in the last election, it was a 10-point gender gap, right? Around 10 points, different polls, different exit polls tell you different things. And that was as bad as it's ever been, but not worse. I think it tied Romney and Obama. So until there is, the thing about politics is there are just a limited number of data points. So until there's an actual election with a huge referendum saying, you know, all these things that seem to have turned off women actually have turned off women, no one's really going to change. I mean, the message to Donald Trump the message to every politician before the last election was, these are a whole bunch of things that you're doing that are stupid, that are going to lose conservatism, that's going to change the Republican Party forever. All wrong because the actual election didn't say it.
We had a theory of politics, I think, of the rules of politics, that there were certain things that were threshold questions for a president. Is this person qualified to be president? Is this person competent to be president? Do you trust this person with the nuclear button?
Right, this guy was so below water on
numbers,
honest that it was inconceivable he'd get elected. Then he did, so he rewrites.
And it was also the other thing on those questions I'm talking about. The other thing was the counter is usually, well, Hillary Clinton was just as bad. Those were the areas where she had the advantage.
Yeah.
Competence, experience, qualification. She had 30, 40-point advantages, which is where you lead to that question of, did we ever really know what the rules of politics were in the first place?
People would say that she was one of the most qualified people to run for president outside of like George H.W. Bush, right? Because of her background and her record. Yeah, it's weird.
So you're pessimistic on the Republicans' chances. Does part of you look at 2016 and say something like that? You know, we could wake up the day after and say there was.
Well, no, it's funny, Mike, as Mike mentioned I think the 75% odds, and I think that's basically where Hillary stood.
Exactly.
You know, I remember watching the World Series that in 2016, and you know the Cubs had won 1 or 2 games, and Nate Silver said, well, you know, Donald Trump has about as much a chance of winning the presidency as the Cubs do of winning the World Series. And when they won the World Series, I said to my friends, you know, Trump might just pull this out.
And it turned out to be prescient. Well, let me take a quick trip back here to the board and check in on that. Then I'm going to come back to the panel, talk a little bit 2020 with them when we come back. But first, we wanted to tell you, we said we're going to take a look at the battle for the Senate. We're talking a little bit here about where the polls stand. Let's see if this is working. So again, we're just it's a work in progress. What we should have here, if I press this button, the latest Senate polls. Let's see if it happens. Oh my God, look at this, it worked. Okay, I think we wanted to, I pressed my luck. Let's try that again. Here we go, that's where I wanted to start. Tennessee. So Interesting here, potentially a shift taking place in Tennessee. We have been talking about this race every week we've been doing this show, and what have we been telling you? We've been telling you Phil Bredesen, the Democrat, has been doing a lot better here than Democrats expected, than Republicans expected. Popular former governor Marsha Blackburn seemed to have some issues. Well, guess what? You can see it here. Here's a poll out just a couple days ago that has Blackburn ahead by 8 in this race. There's another poll out a couple days before that has it at 5 points for Blackburn. That's a shift from what we've been seeing. It raises the question, is political gravity starting to assert itself in Tennessee? Remember, Tennessee is a state that Donald Trump won by 26 points in 2016, so it was kind of surprising to see Bredesen leading in a number of polls over the summer. Are we starting to see a return to what you'd expect in Tennessee? If that is the case, obviously that is very bad news for Democrats. Flip side of that, West Virginia, one of the most pro-Trump states in America, 42 points for Trump in 2016. Well, Joe Manchin continuing to lead his challenger in the Senate race. And, of course, Manchin, the one Democrat to vote for Kavanaugh. Is that going to solidify his hold on West Virginia? That, of course, would be a hold for Democrats. North Dakota, here's a Democrat, Heidi Heitkamp, in a big Trump state who voted no. She's got an ad up now all across North Dakota trying to explain that no vote. She was already, even before casting that vote, the most endangered Democratic incumbent. She was down 12 points before she cast that vote. So this a seat that Democrats are in dire shape in right now in North Dakota. In Missouri, this is the story we've been telling you all along. Dead even in Missouri. McCaskill did vote no on this, on the Kavanaugh confirmation. That could be a factor down the stretch in this race. Remember, Trump won Missouri by 20 points. Nevada, here's a Republican. This is Dean Heller, Republican senator. He is the only Republican senator running for re-election in 2018 in a state that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. Nevada went for Clinton by a couple points. Heller's got to try to hang on. Here's one poll. CNN a couple days ago actually had him down a few points. Heller voted for Kavanaugh's confirmation. Is this a state where that could have negative implications for him potentially? That's the story in Nevada. But in terms of what this does to the battleground, look at it this way. Let's say Arizona, we've been showing you polls there that have that wasn't supposed to happen. We've been showing you polls there that have the Democrats in good shape. Let's say they were to get Arizona. Let's say Manchin were to hang on in West Virginia. Let's try that again. I'm learning this new system. Okay, let's say Manchin were to hang on in West Virginia. They were to get good news there. Let's say let's say McCaskill. How about Missouri? Let's say McCaskill were to hang on in Missouri. Give Democrats a couple states here. Even give them Nevada. Let's say Jackie Rosen wins that state. That wasn't supposed to happen. Let's give. Okay, we got Democrats up. We gave them 4 seats there. We got them to 47. But look, if you lose Nevada, if you're Democrats and you lose Nevada, it's at 48 for Republicans. If Tennessee falls off the board right now, look at that. They're 1 seat away. And if Texas, we had another poll that had Ted Cruz up pretty comfortably in Texas. Boy, I'm having trouble with this new board. If Texas stays red, that's it. North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas. From that entire battleground of 10 seats right there, if Republicans just pick up those 3, they're at 50. Any 50-seat tie is broken by Mike Pence, the vice president. That would be all Republicans need to hang on to the Senate. So one of the stories this week, we've been talking about Democrats having that outside shot to take back the Senate. Their chances of taking back the Senate, based on what we're seeing in those key races, probably based on some of the Kavanaugh politics, those chances have taken a big hit this week. That's the bottom line there on the Senate side. So we said also, it's 2018. We did want to take a quick look ahead to 2020. And why? Because immediately after that confirmation vote for Brett Kavanaugh the other day in the U.S. Senate, one Democratic senator who clearly has his eyes on 2020, Cory Booker, left the Senate, left Washington, got on a plane, and headed out to Iowa, the first in the nation caucus state of Iowa. Cory Booker gave a speech there that night. Here's some of what he had to say.
I want to confess something to you. I got to confess something to you because I see a lot of folk who get caught up in a state of sedentary agitation. They're so upset about what's going on, but they don't do anything about it. I want to confess, sometimes that's me. I'm sitting home late at night watching Rachel, getting all upset with what she's saying. But hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. And the next morning, as if the spirit of Miss Jones was all over this country, women from coast to coast, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, got up and said, Cory Booker, get out of that bed. This is not a time to curl up. It is not a time to shut up. It is not a time to give up. It's a time to get up, to rise up, to speak up.
All right, back with the panel here. Mike, Corinne, Matthew is still with me. So it's interesting to me to watch Corinne, Cory Booker there, because I started my career covering New Jersey politics.
I know. Yeah.
When I started covering New Jersey politics, which is now about 16, 17 years ago, Cory Booker was every New Jersey Republican's favorite Democrat. And now he's given a rabble-rousing speech to the Democratic faithful.
Yeah.
It's an interesting transformation. But what that speech, what does it tell you about Cory Booker, but also where the Democratic Party is right now?
Definitely that he's running. I mean, that's clear. So many of them will. We'll probably have like almost 24 of them at this point, depending how all things turn out on November. I think that it's saying that we're going to have a diverse group of nominees, which I'm really excited about. Clearly, they're going more progressive because that's where our base is going, and talking about real issues that matter, which is health care and education and the economy and tax cuts. So that's what that tells me. I mean, he's all in. Clearly, he's going out there. He's giving a really rousing speech, as Cory Booker can do, and we'll see. We'll see. It's hard to have this conversation when we're so focused on 2018. But I get it.
It's true, but I think what we see, and it was so evident to me watching the Judiciary Committee hearings, even before the allegations, just the first round of Judiciary Committee hearings there, where Brett Kavanaugh hadn't said a word. And you had Cory Booker and a number of Democrats. It was almost like you were watching a competition there to get noticed, to stand out, to show Democrats that they're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You had maybe 4 older men on the committee who weren't running, and then maybe everyone else was, from Kamala Harris to
Feinstein was pretty quiet, I know.
Yeah, she was okay. I am surprised that Cory Booker admitted to watching Friends, or was that not the Rachel he was referring to?
He was talking about Rachel.
Different decade, yeah.
Now I'm getting it. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to talk about the 90s, I'm always up for that, as you might know. But
don't you think, well, what do you think? I think with such a crowded field, it's likely, and with the Democrats changing their rules about who gets the nomination, it's likely they could hurt themselves by going into the convention without a candidate.
I mean, we talk about it every 4 years. The article gets written. Is this the year the Republicans with 16 candidates, the Democrats with probably 35 and 20? They always find a way to sort of,
but it was always because of the number of candidates. But the rule change is huge. They're not going to be able to get behind the front runner. There are no super delegates. And I don't know who is standing out. I have heard a credible case for 20 people, including Michael Avenatti.
I mean, this is the thing. And I feel like in cycles past, Democrat or Republican, you could at roughly this point look at the prospects and say, here's a top 3, here's a top 5, give or take.
Or here are some lanes. Here's the economic conservative lane. Here, there are 4 people in every lane, and they're all credible. It's a traffic jam.
And that reminds me of the Republican race in 2016.
Right.
That's exactly right.
And there, Donald Trump benefited from a large field with very different type of candidates. And he was able to benefit because he had a firm grip on about 40% of the Republican primary vote. And when I look at the Democratic field, the person who kind of fits that profile is Bernie Sanders. And so I think one of the key questions as I'm analyzing the emerging 2020 race on the Democratic side is, what does Bernie do? Because we know Cory's out there in Iowa. We know Kamala Harris is getting ready to run. We know that Biden is thinking about it. We know that Liz Warren's probably going to run. Bernie? I mean, he has his movement.
Yeah.
He could also be a kingmaker.
So
how do you look at him?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, right now what you're seeing is that, at least what we're seeing is that I think people are pretty open right now on the Democrat side, right? They're kind of like, they're not leaning towards anyone, but what you are seeing is name ID. And Bernie Sanders is, I think, considered the most popular candidate, politician in the country. So yeah, people are going to kind of gravitate towards him a little bit. Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, but they're still not. I don't think
how much
is
can I ask you this, because
one
of the challenges I think in covering politics, because everybody on the media is on Twitter, and you see the Twitter conversation, and then you wonder how representative of what's out there is this. On Twitter, on sort of Democratic Twitter, if you want to call it, there is a ton of hostility to Bernie Sanders. Absolutely. How widespread is that? For the fact that he's not registered with the party, he caucuses that, they think he wasn't sufficiently supportive of Hillary. Is that a Twitter phenomenon, or is that a more widespread thing?
I think it plays into the Democratic, clearly the party, right, with the members in the Democratic Party, the inside fighting, because when he came back into the Senate after running for president for 2 years, he went back as an independent. So yes, there's a lot of insiders and people in the party who are just kind of like, well, he's not really one of us. And so that's a tough one. And now if he is going to run, he's going to have to say, oh, no, I'm a Democrat again. So, yeah, it does play. I think it's more of an insider's game.
Yeah.
But he energizes the base, especially young people who are incredibly important right now in this race. We're going to be.
Well, the other front runner is Biden, right?
Yeah.
So a Bernie Biden ticket, they add up to like 150 something in age. That's a third. That's older than a third of the states. Sure, why not? Here's the thing about Bernie Sanders that frustrates me. I know the probably accurate conventional wisdom is things like excites the base, and the important thing is to launch proposals and maybe not be able to always back them up with facts. But when I compare something like his tax plan against Amazon that not one economist looked at and said, well, that has bearing, that stands up to scrutiny. And I think of all the other candidates who could be a front runner or a nominee who also essentially occupy a populist lane. I don't think Kamala Harris, I don't think Cory Booker, I don't think Elizabeth Warren, I can name 15 candidates who have not gotten behind something that dumb, something that that works only in terms of symbolism. And I'm traditional in this sense. I hate the empty gesture just to get attention. Maybe that's where we are. I know that's where the Republicans are. Maybe that's where
I was going to say, right, if that's how you view what Bernie's offering, I mean, there were Republicans saying that about Trump in 2016,
exactly.
and he tapped
I think it's an accurate criticism.
And it worked for him.
It did work for him. I think that there are differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. That's why I was trying. I remember a few years ago, who's the equivalent of Trump? Who's the celebrity without any experience who could come in there for the Democrats? I was thinking maybe someone like Jon Stewart. I guess Michael Avenatti is trying to do that.
Seems to be.
But I do think the Democrats are a little bit wonkier and prize an actual intellectual solution. They're the party who says government can be the solution. So if a Democrat just had a message of blow it up, who cares, Democrats themselves aren't going to hearken to it.
It's a test. I'm waiting to see, and maybe we'll do it here with our NBC poll. I don't know. But I'm waiting to see Avenatti's name get thrown into some of these polls because I think it's an interesting test of what this exposure has done to him in the last couple months.
Steve, I was just going to say, people are upset with him after the Kavanaugh hearing. So I'm wondering where he's going to be as well. Like, a lot of people are blaming him for how it ended up.
Yeah, but aren't those the people who wouldn't be attracted to him in the first place? The people who are kind of more issues-oriented and substantive?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, I just thinking of 1976, right? And so you had somebody come out of nowhere after winning Iowa, and you have Jimmy Carter. And I can see a similar situation happening for all the talk we have. 16 different candidates now, and then you have go through all of next year, and God knows what's going to be going on in the country and what Mueller says, or what the developments are. So, and then suddenly Iowa happens, and just somebody comes out.
Is there somebody, like, do you have somebody in mind you can think of who's sort of nobody's talking about, who's sort of off the radar, or is it just more the...
I mean, the Iowa Democratic electorate tends to be more pacifist. I mean, so someone who has a strong anti-war position. I mean, we just don't really know what the issues are, right? And someone who, I noticed in some of the polls that's coming up, corruption is a big issue for Democrats, too. So someone who kind of has a clean government type profile, which is part of Jimmy Carter's profile.
I'll never tell a lie.
Someone who emerges out of that, I'd be looking forward to.
Hickenlooper fits some of those criteria.
He's interested. He's interested. Let me ask you this. I'm just curious, because I go back and forth trying to figure out if Biden is the simplest, easiest, smartest thing Democrats could do, and it's not that much more complicated, or if it's the dumbest thing they could do. As a Republican looking at it, do you look at Biden and say, hey, he'll get those 75,000 votes across 3 states and it's over? Or do you look at him and say, oh, he's a dream opponent for us?
It's hard to say because, exactly as you point out, in my view, if the Democrats want to reclaim the White House, they need to get those 77,000 votes. They need to be able to reconnect to the Obama-Trump switch vote, right? And that's really what brought Trump to office. And the problem, though, is, I never like looking at the former vice presidents running because they don't have a very good track record. And so with politics, especially presidential politics, which is really about the future, I think Biden representing someone who will be the past, I think has a weakness going into the Democratic field. With presidents, in my view, primary electorates, they want someone who's going to be the future? Where do we go as a country?
And there's some talk that if he runs, would there be a one-term pledge? Would he say this is an emergency mission to, restore normalcy
come
or something?
Restore normalcy. Maybe I put someone like Kamala Harris as my number, my number 2. I've heard those stories as well. I have to push back on Matthew just for a second. I don't think it's just about the 77,000. I think what also happened in 2016 is that our base did not come out, and they were not excited enough. So we have to make sure that we energize young people, people of color as well, to come out. And I think it has to be inclusivity.
Okay, well, we are going to wrap it up there. This is a good talk. I enjoy doing this. We don't have those 4-minute segments where they're in my ear telling me to go to a commercial. So I want to thank Mike Pesca, Matthew Continetti, Corinne Jean-Pierre. Thank you all for being a part of our little experiment here. And thank you all for watching. And we'll see you again next week when we will be 21 days out from Election Day. Thanks for tuning in.